All right, today we are diving deep into the world of a truly fascinating and, well, a really complicated figure, Rudolf Steiner. This is a man whose ideas have quietly shaped everything from the kindergarten your kid might go to the wine you might be drinking. He was a philosopher, an esotericist, and the founder of a spiritual movement called anthroposophy. And let me tell you, it is as influential as it is controversial. So let's get right into it.
So, let me just start by asking you a question. Think about that bottle of biodynamic wine you've seen at the store, or maybe the local Waldorf school with its unique-looking playground, or hey, even that Weleda face cream that's in so many bathroom cabinets. You'd think they have absolutely nothing to do with each other, right? Well, it turns out they all come from the mind of one single, pretty enigmatic guy.
And that guy is Rudolf Steiner. You see, his life story is just fascinating. It's a tale of a highly respected academic whose life just takes this hard right turn into the world of spiritualism and esoteric thought. He really did start out as a serious scholar, but he ended his life as a seer. And that transformation, that's really the key to understanding everything that came after.
So let's just quickly trace his journey, because it's wild. You can see his early life is pretty standard for an intellectual of his time. He's born in the Austrian Empire, he goes to university, he gets a PhD in philosophy, he even lands the super prestigious job editing the scientific works of the great German poet Goethe. I mean, this guy was firmly inside the intellectual establishment. But then comes the pivot. In 1902, he joins the Theosophical Society, which was a huge spiritualist group back then. And then, just about a decade later, he breaks away to start his very own thing. And that's the moment the scholar really truly becomes the seer.
And that thing he started was called anthroposophy. So what on earth is it? Well, Steiner himself called it a spiritual science. It was his unique way of understanding the world, a path that he believed went way beyond what normal science or traditional religion could ever offer. Let's just break down the name itself. It's pretty revealing. You've got anthropos, which is Greek for human, and Sophia for wisdom. So, human wisdom. But for Steiner, this wasn't just wisdom about humans. He saw it as a path to developing a consciousness of one's own humanity. And that's the key difference. He wasn't selling a new religion you had to believe in. He presented it as a practical method, a repeatable science of the spirit for directly seeing and experiencing a spiritual world he believed was all around us. And to really get anthroposophy, you have to understand its big, messy breakup with theosophy. Theosophy means wisdom of God, and it drew a lot from Eastern mysticism. The breaking point, the real drama, happened when its leaders announced that this young boy, Christian Marti, was the reincarnation of Christ. Well, Steiner was having none of it. He completely rejected the idea. He wanted a path that was focused on the individual, your own ability to gain spiritual insight, and one that was rooted in Western thinking. And that one moment just captures the whole shift perfectly. From a wisdom of God that's handed down from on high to a wisdom of the human that supposedly every single person could discover for themselves. Okay, so how are you supposed to do that? How do you access this higher knowledge? Well, Steiner laid out a pretty clear three-step path. It all starts with what he called imagination. This is about training your mind to think in vivid, living pictures, which he said would allow you to see the etheric world, sort of the invisible life force he believes surrounds all living things. The next step is inspiration, where you go beyond those pictures and start to sense the astral world, which he saw as the realm of feelings, of souls. And finally, you reach intuition, the highest state of all, a direct, unmediated connection with spiritual reality itself. Now, for Steiner, these were not just abstract little spiritual exercises you do in a quiet room. Not at all. He fully intended for his spiritual science to be put into action, to literally reshape everything about society, from how we teach our kids to how we grow our food. And this is where we come full circle, right back to that first question. All these different fields, they are the real-world applications of anthroposophy. You've got Waldorf education, with its famous head, heart, and hands model that's built directly on his spiritual theories of how a child develops. You've got anthroposophic medicine, which is the basis for brands like Weleda, and it tries to stimulate the body's own etheric healing forces. And of course, biodynamic agriculture, which doesn't see a farm as just dirt and plants, but as one single living organism that's connected to the entire cosmos. This quote right here, this gets to the absolute heart of what makes biodynamics so different. See, back in 1924, some farmers came to Steiner worried about their soil being depleted by all these new chemical fertilizers. So he gave a series of lectures called the agriculture course. And his answer wasn't about chemistry or nitrogen levels. It was about infusing the Earth with what he called living forces from the cosmos. So, how exactly do you add living forces to a farm? This is where biodynamics gets truly uniquely weird. It's all based on a set of special preparations. It starts with burying cow horns. One is filled with manure and buried all winter. Another is filled with ground-up quartz crystal and buried all summer. And from there, believe it or not, it gets even more esoteric. We're talking about stuffing yarrow flowers into a stag's bladder, hanging it in the sun and then burying it, or packing oak bark inside an animal skull and burying that. These concoctions are then diluted down to almost homeopathic levels and sprayed on the fields, supposedly to channel cosmic energy.
Now, as you can probably guess, practices like these have attracted, let's say, intense skepticism. And this brings us to the really deep controversies that have swirled around Steiner's legacy from the very beginning. Everything from charges of pseudoscience to incredibly troubling accusations about race. The most fundamental critique, the one you'll hear from pretty much the entire scientific community, is that anthroposophy and all its offshoots are, simply put, pseudoscience. They borrow the language of science, but they completely reject its core methods.
From a scientific point of view, the biggest problem is that concepts like cosmic forces are unfalsifiable. There's just no experiment you can design to prove or disprove them. It's outside of science. And while researchers have found that biodynamic farms do work pretty well, there's no solid evidence that they're any better than just standard organic farming. And this critique gets way more serious when you look at medicine, where a rejection of mainstream science has led to some very real concerns about anthroposophical communities' views on things like vaccination.
But perhaps the most damaging and difficult critique of all revolves around race. Steiner inherited and then adapted this idea from theosophy called root race theory, which is this idea of humanity evolving spiritually through different racial stages. An academic analysis of his writings, well, it points to some really disturbing passages where non-white peoples are described in these deeply hierarchical and offensive terms, even calling them degenerate remnants of earlier, less evolved spiritual forms.
So how do Steiner's followers today respond to this? Well, they frame the issue in a few different ways. First, they argue for historical context, that these kinds of racial theories were unfortunately common at the time, and that many of the worst quotes come from unedited lecture notes, not his finished books. They also argue that Steiner's main point was actually that humanity was evolving past race, toward a future based purely on individual souls. And to prove his true intentions, they'll point to things like his founding of the very first Waldorf school for the children of factory workers from all backgrounds.
So, after a century of all this intense debate, where does Steiner's legacy actually stand today? Well, despite all the controversy, his ideas have shown this remarkable staying power, and they continue to have a pretty significant global influence. And to see that influence, you really just have to look at the numbers. Take biodynamic farming. This chart shows that by 2020, countries like Germany and Australia had tens of thousands of hectares dedicated to it. We're not just talking about a few fringe farms here. And when you add to that more than 1,000 Waldorf schools all around the globe, it's pretty clear that Steiner's ideas are not just surviving, they're actually thriving.
Which brings us right back to our big question. Was Rudolf Steiner a modern prophet who saw a more holistic path for humanity's future? Or was he a gifted, charismatic charlatan whose powerful imagination created a dangerous mix of pseudoscience and outdated ideology? You know, he created schools that are praised for their creativity, farming methods celebrated for their connection to the earth, and a philosophy that tried to bring spirit back into a material world. But he did it using methods that completely defy science and are tied to a deeply problematic view of human history. The answer, it seems, is every bit as complex and contradictory as the man himself.